Hello, I'm Tim Harris. This is Julie Harris, and this is Real Estate Coaching Radio.
That's right. So make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any future episodes. Thanks again for popping by. Hit that like button, and don't forget to leave your comments and questions so we can get right back with you.
We will. Thank you for continuing to make our podcast, Real Estate Coaching Radio, the #1 listened to podcast for real estate professionals in at least the United States. And let us know what you think about this video. Leave your comments below. Thank you.
You mentioned Elon Musk, not one of my questions, so I'm sort of curious since you brought this up.
I mean, I think he's clearly very brilliant and has done a lot of things that no one believed were even possible. But it's a fine line, right? Like you can see, you're asking. I would say he's less egotistical than one might have suspected, or that might even be deserved, considering the incredible things he's accomplished. But you can see how even a billionaire who's done all this stuff, who's so busy, has so much responsibility on his shoulders, can't stop himself from saying dumb things on Twitter that make his life harder, right? Like that, I don't know if you guys saw it, so he got involved with trying to save those kids in that cave in Thailand, and then one of the rescuers said, well, you know, Elon Musk didn't really do anything. And instead of him being confident and secure enough in himself to be like, okay, look, most people respect me, I've got a pretty good reputation, he calls the guy a pedophile on Twitter, which he has no evidence for, and made a bunch of people not like him, and it's probably going to cost him millions of dollars when this guy inevitably sues him. You know, it's like, and just like, look, you're the CEO of like 3 companies. Why don't you just not create self-inflicted drama and conflict in your life? But it's so hard.
Well, his interesting comments about artificial intelligence and all that was so far ahead, and a fun topic over like a glass of wine.
Right.
But to be said in front of 1 billion people, not so sure.
Sure, and I mean, he's now going on Twitter and he attacks like people who he suspects are shorting Tesla stock. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is not a good use of the CEO of the company's time. He would be so much better off, again, someone else who we won't mention, just delete Twitter from your phone, just live a less conflict, dramatic life, and do the difficult job in front of you. It's like what we're trying to do, whether it's like build a company or build a personal brand or just deal with the stresses of life. It's hard enough. Like, why go, what's the saying, don't borrow trouble? Like, why go seek it out?
So what is it that causes people like that to act like that?
Well, I think a lot of us are sort of we just are emotionally reactive, right? So it's like somebody insults you, I'm going to insult them back, right? Or somebody criticizes me, I'm going to defend myself. You're not stopping and going, hey, I'm a billionaire. This is a hero on television. I'm just going to leave this alone. You're just like, I'm going to treat this person as if I would a random person who shouted at me on the street. So we're just emotionally reactive. I think that's part of it. And then, sometimes we can also just get addicted. Like, adrenaline is very addictive. And it's I have this problem too. I can find myself sticking my nose in things or getting, you get involved with this and then you call someone else and you're like, did you hear about this? And that's really exciting.
But that's ego, isn't it?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to make yourself important. Mm-hmm. Trying to, you enjoy that rush of being involved and necessary.
That surge.
Yeah. It's like, look, like 2 of your employees don't like each other. Does the boss need to get involved, or can you step back and let them resolve this themselves? And if it's important enough, maybe they'll come to you. But like micromanaging is often a form of ego because you just want to be central to everything that's happening rather than going, hey, my job is to think really big picture, not to care about like who's stealing lunches out of the refrigerator or whatever the nonsense is. And so, yeah, we can just get caught up and we're reactive. And I like what Elon Musk should think about, and like he's really smart, so he doesn't need my advice, but it's like, if Elon Musk isn't thinking super big picture about Tesla, who's thinking about it, right? If Elon Musk is not attacking some guy on Twitter, someone else will do it, right? like you don't need to do that, but if you don't do the really important things, no one will do them. And that's what you want to ask yourself. Like, am I the only person who can do this thing? And then it's probably a good sign that maybe you can do it. And then if other people can do it, can you have the confidence to go, I'm going to leave that to them?
Since we're talking about billionaires,
Okay.
Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
We're talking about ego, and I'm running in my head. I don't know if he has a Twitter account.
He's much better at this, right? You don't hear him getting in trouble very often. You don't hear him sort of in various battles with people. You wouldn't know he was the richest man in the world necessarily unless you were really you just know that Amazon keeps making stuff that you like, and they keep seeming to spend more and more money there. And I think that's probably a sign of you don't hear about Warren Buffett's enormous yacht, or that Jeff Bezos just bought a $700 million. It's interesting that the super wealthy people, you don't hear about sort of egotistical purchases. They're never the people building the world's largest mansion. It's always the people sort of lower down on the chain that want you to think of them a certain way. It's the same if you walked into a martial arts studio, the guy with the black belt is not the one talking trash. He's the nice person in the corner talking to everyone. He's friendly. He's confident. It's the insecure people who are lower in the sort of hierarchy that want your attention and want to prove themselves.
Do you think it's necessary, we're talking about billionaires, we can scale this down obviously to normal humans,
yes.
But do you think it's necessary, my mind is going, I wonder if there was a certain internal evolution of ego taming that had to happen for, one person to transcend to become another, and maybe this,
Yeah, I think it's interesting because oftentimes what makes us successful can become a liability for us down the road. So to become a billionaire, at a certain point, you were a millionaire, and then you were worth $100 million, and then you were worth $500 million, and then
there's some steps in there.
There were steps,
but
so at each one of those steps, you had to go I want more, right? So on the one hand, that's positive in that it helped you accomplish these things, and maybe along the way you employed hundreds of thousands of people, you created all this wealth, you did great stuff. But that I need more, I can't stop, I never feel satisfied, that drove Elon Musk. He could have retired after PayPal. He didn't need to start SpaceX, and then he didn't need to start Tesla, and then he didn't need to start Solar City. So that insatiableness is on the one hand an advantage, and on the other hand it's a disadvantage. It's the same with a boxer, right? The boxer who won't quit, that's what gets him through, all the rounds of the fight, but it's also what keeps him in the ring longer, well past the point he should retire. So another example of this is to do what we do in this room, to start your own business or to work for yourself or to take these risks, you're going to have people around you that go that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. Don't quit your job. Don't bet on yourself. It's too risky. The market's going to explode. They're trying to help you by telling you not to do this. And then they're wrong. You end up being successful. Well, what lesson do you learn from that? Do you learn that when people tell you not to do something, you should never listen to them? Or did you find out why they were wrong in that specific instance? Does that make sense?
It totally does. I think everyone in the audience can relate to what he just said. It's almost like the initial burst was, I'm going to prove you wrong. Yeah. And then after that, that's like a repeated behavior. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like when the whole world is telling you that's a bad idea, sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. And you need to retain the ability to evaluate that objectively. So I talk about American Apparel a fair amount in my writing because that was a company that I worked at that sort of was spectacularly successful and then spectacularly unsuccessful. And that was a good example. That idea is crazy, right? We're going to make our own clothes, we're going to own our own stores, we're going to manufacture in the United States, we're going to pay a fair wage, we're not going to use professional models, all these things. But it worked. The problem was, and so all the responsible people said, don't do that, it won't work. And then it did work. So the CEO took from that, don't listen to responsible people. And that's a bad lesson because responsible people are on average more right than they are wrong. So he should have just focused on, okay, they were wrong for these specific reasons. They didn't understand the market as well as I did, or they were missing this bit of information that I have. But instead, now when those same people were like, you need to hire a really good accountant, you need to staff up with other professionals inside the organization, you should stop having relationships with your employees, like really basic pieces of advice. He was like, you don't know what you're talking about, you're a hater. And, eventually he ignored that advice long enough that he made a lot of catastrophic mistakes.
Maybe I should listen to you because I'm sleeping with my president.
Yeah. Well, so it's you've got to be able to disregard bad advice and listen to good advice, and that's harder to do the more successful you are, because now your ego wants to take shortcuts, right? You're like, I want to do this, obviously I'm right. Like, I'll give you an example. So on The Obstacle is the Way, which is probably my best-selling book, my publisher wanted to title it just The Way. And that's obviously totally wrong, right? So we had this big argument. They're like, but it's shorter, it's simpler. And I said, but it doesn't mean anything, right? It's not an expression. And so I ended up being right. But now on the next book, let's say we have a dispute over the title. It doesn't automatically follow that what I want is right and what they want is wrong. I have to be able to sort of put the past aside and go, who's right in this specific instance? And that's what tends to happen, is that successful people start to think, well, whatever I want is right, because clearly I was right in the past. And that's a very dangerous position to put yourself in.
Does the ego, this is a weird question. Does the ego want you to fail?
Well, I think what the ego wants is whatever, and this is sort of weird, because the ego doesn't really exist, but the ego wants what's easiest, what makes it feel good in the short term, what's simple, what's straightforward, what makes it feel important, right? And so I would say in the long run, that inevitably leads to some form of failure.
Because you don't actually drill down and move and earn the disciplines and the skills and all that to...
Yeah. And you're so self-absorbed that it's so focused on itself that it loses sight. Like, it's hard to think of a profession, for instance, that does not rely almost entirely on providing, especially in the capitalist system, everything we're doing is about creating value for other people and then capturing a bit of that value, right? So, like, let's say a musician, if you might think, oh, like, they're a rock star, they're egotistical, they get to be. But, like, the whole point of what they do is to provide a valuable, meaningful experience for other people. And so if the musician gets so up in their own bubble, so obsessed with themselves, so focused only on their own taste, how can they make music that connects with other people, right? And, if let's say, as you become more successful in real estate, let's say, you lose sight of what people who are not in your income bracket want in a property, you're going to be, again, you're not going to know how to serve. Like, there's a certain amount of empathy required in selling stuff to people. And ego is the opposite of empathy. And so that's why ego is so dangerous. You're losing sight of the fact that, like, this isn't about you. It's about making something for other people.
Let me break this down in real estate speak. So some of you guys are having trouble picking up the phone and thinking about doing prospecting, for example. The way to get beyond that is don't think about how is it going to make me feel? What am I going to say? Don't focus on you. Focus on the dominant thought of how can I be of service to the person I'm speaking to. And if you focus on them in communications and what he's describing, then your ego is set aside, albeit maybe just temporarily, but then you can initiate that phone call. Now, what happens after that comes with more practice, but that's the essence of it, is being of service to other people.
Right. And like, for instance, like, would I live here? It doesn't matter whether you would live here. Would other people live here, right? Like, you're creating a rental property, you're selling something, it's like, there's only one of you. There's lots of other people. And so you've got to be able to sort of cultivate this ability to really put yourself in the mind and in the shoes and in the life of other people. And then what's so paradoxical about it is that the more successful you get, the harder that is. Particularly in like creative and entrepreneurial professions, because you're now probably not your target customer. Early on you are, but maybe now you're not as much, right? Like, again, let's say you're a rapper. You don't live on the streets anymore. That's not your life, but that might be who's listening to your music. So how can you not become a sort of a victim of your own success in that way?
That's interesting. So how does having an internal, this is something I read you wrote, internal scorecard. I thought that was a great way of explaining.
Well, one of the reasons that I think an internal, Warren Buffett says, it's better to live your life by an internal scorecard than an outer scorecard. And clearly by an outer scorecard, he's extraordinarily successful, right? Like he's not hurting by that metric. But he has an internal metric that he judges his success by. So just because he made $1 billion on a deal, to us, that's a huge success. To him, maybe what he sees is that in retrospect he pulled the trigger too quickly, or that he took a risk that in retrospect he shouldn't have taken, or whatever. So, or that although he might have been successful, he didn't hold himself to the personal standard. Maybe he did something unethical, or he was a little sneaky about it. He didn't like how he comported himself. So the story I tell in Ego is about the New England Patriots. They draft Tom Brady in 2000 as the 199th pick in the 6th round of the draft. So by an outer metric, that's the best draft pick in the history of sports, right? You get 5-time Super Bowl winner, multiple MVP, throws for all these yards, is maybe the greatest ever. But to the Patriots, it's actually a failure because they took somebody else in the 5th round, in the 4th round, in the 3rd round. They thought when they were looking at it, they thought 5 other people were better picks than Tom Brady, which is insane. Mm-hmm. And they, in a way, they only got lucky that Drew Bledsoe gets hurt, Tom Brady works his way up through the system. They did not know what they had. In fact, they thought Tom Brady was a 6th round pick. And so when you have a higher standard for yourself, what that does is it prevents you from celebrating too much when you win, because you see all the things that you could have done wrong or you could have done better. Nick Saban read my book, and he talks about this too. Now he says the media will seize on the fact that they're up by 45 points and he's angrily pacing the sideline. Well, that's because the team isn't playing as well as they could be playing, or they're not doing it exactly how. So it's not that he's unable to be happy. It's that he's not letting the fact that they're up determine his mood. He's determining whether they're being the best they can be determine his mood. Does that make sense?
It does.
And then, so instead of being up here, we're up here. That's great. But then where it really works out is, let's say you do have that setback. The market turns, or a deal blows up, or you get attacked unfairly for something. Instead of being down here, you're still here, because you're not letting the external success or failure of a project determine how you feel about yourself. You're saying, so let's say you work on some deal for months, and then it doesn't work out like we thought. Well, does that mean that you're a failure? Or when you actually look at it, based on the information that you had at the time, was it a good or bad decision? It's not letting the final result determine whether it was a success or a failure, but whether you knew whether it was a good decision based on the information that you had at the time. So ego is definitely not our friend when we're successful, but it's like our worst enemy when we're failing, right?
Talk about that.
Yeah, if because you're driving a Ferrari, you think you're amazing. Well, what happens when the Ferrari gets repossessed, right? And now you're driving.
Pay cash for it.
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about it.
Now you're driving a Jetta, right? Are you less of a person, right? If you think that, if you're sitting there in first class and you're watching all the people pass you, and you think that this says that you're special and better than them, well, what happens? Now you're in a cash flow crisis and you're sitting in the back of a Southwest flight. Are you sitting there thinking that you're a POS and that you're a loser and that everyone's laughing at you? It's like, no, it didn't say anything about you when you sat at the front of the plane. It doesn't say anything about you when you're sitting at the back of the plane. What matters is sort of the standards that you hold yourself to, the work that you're putting in, the decisions that you're making, and it's detaching from the results a little bit.
Interesting. So this is I thought about how to ask this question. This is a very hard question to figure out how to ask. when I was trying to understand from a coaching perspective how to help somebody recognize the ego as it's manifesting in themselves, because most of us have, unless you're consciously aware of the physiological sometimes, like for me it was like a little blah, 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 was happening right here, you know? Yeah. So then I give myself a pause before I respond, and then that would help me to stop myself from responding, and then as soon as I observed my ego sort of like just out there trying to, and all I had to see is detach myself from it just a couple times. So
I think I talked in the book a little bit about, so Adam Smith, sort of the father of capitalism, he had this exercise he talked about called the Impartial Spectator. And so he said, one of the ways to be a more moral, sort of kind, generous person, whatever, is to watch your own behavior as if you were an impartial spectator. Or as you're making a difficult decision, imagine that there's some other person standing right there watching you. Obviously, for people who are religious, this is easier to do. You're like, God is watching, how do I want? But if you don't have that, sort of going like, how would I justify this to another person? And if you can't do it, that's kind of a bad sign, right? Or, so, you're about to maybe take this shortcut or do this little thing that maybe is not illegal, but you probably wouldn't want to get caught doing it. If you're sort of stepping back and going, well, how would someone see this? Can I actually justify this to them? It can sort of be a check against some of those like sort of baser impulses, I think. But I would say one of the benefits of having a coach or having a mentor or having a sort of community of people around you is that it sort of builds that, right? Because then you do have to walk through what you're doing. If you're a lone wolf, you just do whatever you feel like. It's easier for you to rationalize things to yourself. With my relationship with my wife, we're sort of in business together, obviously, both because we're a couple, but also because we work together. I have to run my thinking about things through her oftentimes. And she's, by having that extra person who wasn't there in the meeting, she's going to be less emotionally reactive about something, or she's going to say, does this really matter? Do you care about this that much? Or what are the consequences of that going to be? And so I think it's both, can you step back and evaluate yourself impartially? That's great. But also, can you build relationships or systems of accountability that help you do that as well?
On a micro level, though, when you're talking with this, you've talked to thousands, hundreds, millions of people about this. How do you coach them to keep their ego in check so that they can observe it manifesting themselves? I just gave for example, but maybe you have a less woo-woo way of explaining it.
Yeah, I do think what you were saying about sort of that pause, that's really important. So not making split-second decisions, just going like, hey, almost none of the things that I'm doing are that urgent, so I'm going to sort of put a mandatory pause. So one of the things I do with emails, let's say, is like, let's say I get some nasty email from someone. I'm in a dispute about something or whatever. I go like, well, what if I just like, I'll say like, what if I just didn't get this email? What would happen, right? Like what if, sometimes like your phone eats an email and you're like, oh, I just never saw that. And so I would go like, well, what would happen if that just happened with this thing? Like if I just didn't get it? Like, and oftentimes the answer is like nothing. Like they just wanted to say something, mean to me, and then I want to say something mean to them, then we just go round and round. Well, what if I just didn't get it? That would stop it, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, so I'm just going to wait. Or I'll go like, what if I didn't have my phone on me and I missed this phone call? Okay, then everyone would talk 2 hours later and cooler heads would prevail. Well, let me actually do that. Do you know what I'm saying? I sort of build these pauses into what I'm doing.
I forget, Julie, if you're in here. Yeah. What was that thing we listened to recently where they said the actual advice you got from your grandma about sleep on it overnight? Oh, it was the sleep guy. Yeah, you probably know him.
There's something to that because when you sleep on it and you wake up in the morning, your philosophy about what happened is completely different than what happened in the morning.
Yeah, that expression, like never go to bed angry, that's actually terrible advice because now it's like, no, it's midnight. Let's definitely have this argument right now when we're both tired.
With a glass of wine in you.
That's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think I wrote about this for Daily Stoic, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg had said that on her wedding day, her mother said to her, you know, it helps in a marriage to be a little bit deaf. And what she meant is that sometimes you just don't hear things, right? And she said that she's applied that to being a Supreme Court justice, that sometimes in an argument or in a business setting, we all say things that we don't really mean, or that, you know, we say pointed things because we're reacting emotionally. And again, if you can build a process where you're like, oh, I didn't hear that, or what was that? You know, like you can sort of prevent, you don't have to engage in every bit of conflict. But ego says like, no. If I don't stand up for myself right here, if I don't win this, then I'll be kicked around for the rest of my life, right? Or everyone will see that I was beaten here, and then no one will respect me, and then it will all be over. And of course, none of this is true. And so, if you can just sort of, having some selective ignorance is often great. Like I think about this too. If you know the line from Hemingway to Fitzgerald, he said, you know, if you read the good reviews, then you have to read the bad ones too. And what he was really saying is don't read the reviews, good or bad, right? Just don't read any of them. And so that's, again, a little bit of selective ignorance. Don't read the puff pieces, and then don't read the takedowns. Just keep doing what you're doing, sort of keep that inner scorecard, and you'll probably be happier.
Hello, thank you for having watched this video. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
That's right, and don't forget to hit that like button, leave your comments and questions below, and we will get right back with you.
Thank you for watching this video, and remember to watch the next one. You're going to love that one.